All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everyone. Inshallah, today we're going to be continuing, of course, our tafsir. Let's see what we did yesterday. So yesterday we took let's call it a long tafsir in regards to the orphans, and we talked about the orphans and the relationship between وَلَا تَقْرَبُوا مَالَ الْيَتِيمِ إِلَّا بِالَّتِي هِيَ أَحْسَنُ, and do not approach the wealth for the orphans unless it was in the best, in other words, in their favor, in their interest, and not necessarily in your interest. And we went in some details when it said حتى يبلغ أشده. Is this talking about physically? Is this talking about mentally? Is this, in other words, reaching the age of puberty, or is this talking about their maturity, their capacity to basically understand how to do money management and all of that? And we went in details in that regards, and we kind of went in a beautiful quote about Ibn al-Arabi and what he had said about Abu Hanifa, when Abu Hanifa regarded that it's the 25 years of age, and Ibn al-Arabi, well, this is the maximum, but Ibn al-Arabi basically went and undermined that reference and said, well, wait a minute, you cannot do this type of analogy. So anyhow, we made the story short, and we basically said that what really matters is their ability to hold that responsibility, to channel it for their own interest, at least for their interest, meaning for the benefit of, for their own benefit. And certainly for the guardian, they basically have two responsibilities: to use that money for the maintenance, for that orphan's maintenance, basically, whether we're talking about their deen, we're talking about their health, we're talking about their mental health, we're talking about their chastity, we're talking about basically using as for the fifth one, basically using that money to invest it in the child's favor, that is the orphan's favor. And definitely there was some, let's call it some details that we went into with the conflict of interest on how some of those guardians might actually use that money for their own favor, whether perhaps maybe invested and think that, hey, I can consider that as I'm making a loan from this orphan, and that we said that that's not permissible. And of course, we also went through وَأَوْفُوا الْكَيْلَ وَالْمِيزَانَ, and that, of course, being just, whether we're speaking about in trade and in amounts, or whether it's a volume of something, or whatever it is, in what and how we would measure a fair trade. And certainly fair trade is really based, number one, on consent, but that it's not the only thing. Okay. In the West, or at least in modern, let's say it that way, in modern trade, it's all about consent. If there's consent, then that's basically enough, but not in Islam. In Islam, there are a number of different things. Certainly, we're talking about al-mal al-mutaqawwam, meaning that it has a value. There are certain things that in Islam do not have value, even if they manage to make a trade. In Islam, consider it does not have value, such as alcohol, liquor, of course, pork, anything that is of najasa, or basically impurity, or anything that is considered as khubth and khaba'ith. So things like tobacco, etc., that's considered khubth and khaba'ith, or mufattirat, and therefore not of value. And number three, I think that would be really important to mention, which is the condition of certain trade in certain items must be of the same weight. Okay, so if you're trading gold for gold, you can't say, well, this is, I don't know, the gold during my grandma's time, and my gold is during, I don't know, my time, or this is, there's a lot of labor invested in this gold, and therefore this is different than that gold that doesn't have enough labor in it, or whatever it is. So in Islam, there are some items that require the same amount. So exchanging them because they're different quality, or because there was labor in it, etc. So we're talking about gold, we're talking about silver, we're also talking about dates, barley, these things, they have to be the same weight. So, very limited things, but it would be considered interest if you basically had increased in the amount or in the weight or in the value or any of that. So, that's one thing that we just remember, that interest, we usually people think of interest as only one thing. They would think of interest as, hey, for example, would give you $100 and tell you, hey, you bring it back by Tuesday. You don't bring it back by Tuesday. I basically say, okay, I'm going to charge you like a 3% interest on that for not bringing it on time. They only know this type of interest, but that's riba nasi'a. They usually forget there's riba al-fadl. In Islam, there are two types of interest. Riba nasi'a, which is the one that basically relates to timing, an amount of money, and then timing as a person going beyond the date, or a certain time, or perhaps maybe as giving you the service on money, that's riba nasi'a. Okay, but riba al-fadl is different. People usually are completely unaware of riba al-fadl, which is basically doing interest, or in let's call it the price, and having a different price or not having equivalency in the weight itself. Keep that one in mind. So riba al-fadl is basically exchanging item of the same item with a different value. So we're talking about, let's say, 10 grams of gold, but another item is 5 grams of gold. But the reason perhaps that person accepted is because this 10 gram of gold thing is Indian or Dubai jewelry, or, it has a different kind of a probably, labor that was done in it. But that other gold doesn't have the similar type of labor. That would be considered ribal fadl. It has to be 10 grams for 10 grams in equivalence of 10 grams of gold, but not 5, because this one probably has more, of decorations and all of that. So just keep that in mind. Riba al-fadl. Okay, and we also went into لا نكلف نفسا إلا وسعها, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would only obligate us or prohibit things on us that is within our capacity. Keep that one in mind. Within our capacity. And we said that is in order to expand your capacity. So if you learn how to control yourself, or how to maneuver yourself and force yourself into perseverance, then that's what's going to create within you that stamina, that courage, that power, etc., in order to, let's call it, expand your capacity to a certain potential of al-ihsan. So that's what basically we talked about. So this whole idea of لا نكلف نفسا إلا وسعها is in order to let us know that there is a potential that Islam wants you to go up to. So that's why it will give you certain things that are probably maybe tough on you to let go of, but Islam is telling you, listen, it's for your sake. I want you to let go of that because it's for your sake. I want you to learn how to give up on this or that item, because I want you to develop a certain power, a certain ability, a certain perseverance, a certain grit. And that is to basically help you to live up to that courage. And we also said that there are four main things that Islam had considered as the pillars of how to grow within yourself, basically this type of ilwusa, this type of getting up to a certain potential. And we said that there are four elements. We talked about one, recognizing justice, or recognizing where you're trying to go and what that principle is, basically. And number two, that there's going to be an amount of pain to endure, and enduring pain is basically part of strengthening yourself and giving yourself basically that stamina. So there's going to be definitely an amount of pain, and that way you would recognize that, not to give up on the first time that you would feel pain, but pain is part of it. So feeling pain is part of what will give you the strength. feeling and enduring the pain is part of what will create the perseverance within you. So that's number two, feeling the pain. Number three is satisfaction or al-iffa, which basically means to learn how to give up on certain offers, even though they can be things that, are easy to get, but you give up on certain offers, halal offers. They could be halal, they could be perhaps available, not halal, just available things. It's right there. I can get it. No one will know. No one can say me. I won't lose the privilege. But that's the thing, is that you recognize that I have to live up to this principle despite the offer and despite the availability of me not getting discovered and me perhaps maybe getting away with it, etc. But that's because I'm trying to live up to the principle. And number four, which is after all these different things, let's call them the practices, let's call them stages, that's when the person will get into fighting fear. So in the first one, you're basically fighting the misconceptions, injustice. In recognizing principle, recognizing justice, you're fighting misconceptions. And in number two, in pain and enduring pain and sabr, you're basically fighting the different shahawat. You're fighting the different drives, the different shahawat, the different lusts. In number three, in al-iffa, you're basically fighting again shahawat, but shahawat type two. There's shahwat type one and there's shahwat type two. Shahwat type one is when it's an inner drive that basically relates to for perhaps eating, drinking, and perhaps maybe we're talking about the drive of the drive of maybe sexuality, etc. All of those. That's shahwa type two. Shahwa type three is not necessarily within the parameter of haram, but it's within the parameter of perhaps maybe the parameter of giving you another type of a privilege in dunya. Number four, which is fighting fear. That's why it's courage. Okay, you fight fear. Fear is there. You're afraid that you might actually lose your social status. You're afraid you might lose your money. You're afraid you might lose perhaps certain privileges if you held on to your Islam. You're afraid to lose that. So there's definitely that fear right there. If you give up on your Islam, you give up on your Islam, or you give up on what is basically considered as the main foundation of who you are as a Muslim, then you basically lost all the different practices that you were trying to work on, which is recognizing justice, enduring patience, and or enduring pain to get to the patience. And number three, which basically is ifa. Okay. Now, if you do not fight that fear, you just lost all that training. All that training that you were doing in facing all of that pain and endurance and that ifa, you just lost it. Where? At the final stage. With courage, only the ones that basically had passed and literally passed these stages are going to be strong enough to make it to the stage of courage, that even if their own perhaps life was put at risk, or maybe their social status was put at risk, degree that is, or maybe CV, or maybe job, or maybe money, or whatever it is, they're not willing to give up on their deen. That's what basically is that is basically what our goal is, or what Islam's goal is that you basically get into all that training to learn in justice, to basically endure the amount of pain no matter what it is, and three, to stay strong even when it was possible or probably offered to you to give up and probably given a privilege, but you stay despite all the fear, you stay strong and you endure all that power, even if you risked all your money, all your probably social status and social privileges, or probably the money privileges or whatever it is, you were willing to risk all of that, but not willing to risk your deen. That's basically the thing. So when you say لا يكلف الله نفسا إلا وسعها, you basically stand strong, you basically stand and you go through all that training in order to keep you basically a believer that is a leader for yourself and a leader and a good example for others. Keep that one in mind. How do you get into those stations and how do you stay strong? Okay. We also we left off at وَإِذَا قُلْتُمْ فَعْدِلُوا. And if you say something and you say here, when you say وَإِذَا قُلْتُمْ, if you say something, then be basically just. This isn't necessarily just talking about just saying something, but this is within this context. إِذَا قُلْتُمْ فَعْدِلُوا, that means if you say something that regards to witness, okay, or that regards to judging on something, then you have to say the real justice. You have to speak in justice, even if that probably harmed perhaps the interest of a relative or the interest of somebody that you might be sharing a certain interest. Perhaps if your brother maybe won the case, perhaps by him winning the case, you'll probably at least get some kind of a backup maybe in your life. And you would say, you know what, I need my brother to win the case. And even if I were to come up in court and appear in court and say, hey, I do remember such and such happening, even though you know it didn't happen, but as long as it supports your brother's case, you're willing to do whatever. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذَا قُلْتُمْ فَعْدِلُوا. You got to say, you have to say the truth, and especially if this involves witness and if this involves people's rights, and even if it is at the expense of perhaps even going against your own interests or perhaps going against maybe your own self, then in that situation, it is part of deen that you would say the truth and you would hold strong and you would live that courage. And that's the thing, is that you would live that courage. Why? Because remember when we said the four foundations of akhlaq, we said justice, we said recognizing justice and principle, we said patience and sabr, we said iffa, and we also said shaja'a, or courage. Those are the four foundations. No need to repeat those, but those are really important to understand these four pillars, because if you don't understand these four pillars, you're going to be lost in how you grow, one, in your children, these manners, and how you let them see. Sometimes to have kind of like a graph to recognize what am I training myself into? What is Islam training me into? That helps you visualize, the whole, let's call it the whole plan of akhlaq and what I'm trying to strengthen myself into, what I'm trying to discipline myself into. And of course, where there's that ilm and there's that discipline. You don't confuse the two, because ilm is one side that but just because you have the ilm, it doesn't mean you have the discipline. So when you're talking about those four elements of akhlaq, that's basically to bring in the discipline. Okay, to bring in the discipline. So وَإِذَا قُلْتُمْ فَعْدِلُوا وَلَوْ كَانَ ذَا قُرْبَى. You say the truth, and you say basically that witness in truth, even if this person was a relative. So when we talk about qurba, we're talking about somebody that you may share blood relations, or blood relations could be a father, could be a brother, could be a mother, could be a sister, could be an aunt, could be an uncle. All of those are qurba. Okay? Or cousin, those are qurba. And of course, when we're speaking about وَإِذَا قُلْتُمْ فَعْدِلُوا, there's definitely going to be probably a price to pay when perhaps I witness against my brother, he's probably never going to talk to me because he's going to consider that, hey, how did you witness against me? That's not being that's not being a support. This is really important to keep in mind that shaitan will use different labels in order to basically make you stand against truth. They'll use different labels and say, oh, you're supposed to be in support of your brother. Well, not at the expense of truth. Not at the expense of truth. Truth in the word of truth and justice goes beyond every single one. What if this was my father? Should I witness against my father, even though I basically am the core witness? But then if I witness against my father, he's definitely not going to be content. Two things. Number one is that scholars actually had differences of opinions on whether the son or the daughter can be a witness against her mother or a witness against her father. In other words, basically, they're called al-furu', the descendants, basically, witnessing against the witnessing against the basically the father and mother. The father and mother is that area of sensitivity that scholars had differences of opinions about. The first opinion said that no, their witness cannot be accepted. That's the first opinion. Their witness cannot be accepted. Why not? They said because if they were to come forward, رضا الوالدين and having their parents being content over them is a priority. And if that's going to risk رضا الوالدين, then they'll come forward and come in a witness. The second opinion said, no, we will take their witness if it goes against their parents, but we will not take their witness if it goes in favor of their parents. That was a second opinion. Why would you take their witness if it goes against their parents, but not in favor? They said, we'll look into it. And if it goes against their parents, but it was basically right there within the parameter, وَلَوْ كَانَ ذَا قُرْبَى, and it is to support justice, then they have to come forward regardless of this being their father or their brother. So we're just going to take the comprehensive statement in this ayah, and certainly Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being content is our priority and not necessarily the content of that parent, because we're supposed to be supporting justice. That was a second opinion. And why did you say you won't take their witness if it was in favor of their father? They said, well, there's a conflict of interest. Because if I'm going to take his witness in this situation, perhaps there's a conflict of interest. If father wins the case and probably gets $100,000, then in that situation, the child might be, or this person that is witnessing, which is his child, okay, he might actually be getting some kind of a benefit. Then you cannot witness on yourself. So that's like being a witness over yourself and for your own favor. That doesn't make sense. So that's the second opinion. Third opinion, they said we'll scrutinize the case and we will see if there is one, conflict of interest, two, if there is a possibility that this is probably having some area that makes this witness as not being a fair witness. So it depends on the case and it depends on the trial and it depends on what kind of witness. So then they distinguish between a criminal case and a transaction case and a different kind and of probably domestic abuse where there's the only perhaps witness on the case. So they said we'll have to look into the case and then determine whether we can take his witness or not. So in other words, we'll basically have experts get involved to see in law or to see in psychology or to see a number of different things to determine whether there is a conflict of interest or whether such a witness carries some amount of lacking credibility or lacking at least a fair and an unbiased witness. So yeah, now you know yet that when it comes to witnessing against the father, and is that accepted or not? And the scholars have different opinions on that. وَبِعَهْدِ اللَّهِ أَوْفُوا. And be committed. The word ahd, what is al-ahd? Al-ahd is covenant. So when you say بِعَهْدِ اللَّهِ أَوْفُوا, in other words, all the different things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had taken upon you. So what does that look like? When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had taken upon us, وَإِذْ أَخَذَ رَبُّكَ مِنْ بَنِي آدَمَ مِنْ ظُهُورِهِمْ وَأَشْهَدَهُمْ عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ أَلَسْتُ بِرَبِّكُمْ قَالُوا بَلَى. And what happened? So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took from the backs of the sons of Adam, from the son, well, no, took from the back of Adam, his sons, and he made them witnesses upon themselves, am I not your Lord? And they said, verily you are. But what happens on Judgment Day? They will basically admit and they will confess and say, well, we were not aware, and they will say, أن تقولوا إنا كنا عن هذا غافلين. We were pacified from recognizing all of that. And we were basically, we were basically just pacified with something else. Something else distracted us from recognizing within. So what happens? That's ahdillah. That's the key ahdillah, is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you with that instinct to, one, to seek why you were created, who created you, and what you were created for. Okay, but I don't remember any of that. So what are you talking about? Like, how is that supposed to be something that I'm supposed to consider that happened when I don't remember any of it? Remember, memory does not only happen in your brain. There's some memory that happens as part of your DNA. You don't remember anything about your ancestors and what they looked like and perhaps what genetic deformities they might have had or any of that, but your DNA will not forget. It's part of your DNA. It's part of your makeover. And, for many generations, you may not know any of it. In fact, your father, your grandfather may not know any of that, but there's this very, very intricate record kept within your DNA that basically recalls all your genetic history and perhaps all the makeover, including trauma. You may not know that once upon a time and probably in one of the generations in your history, they probably were afraid of a certain thing and it passed through the genes. And there's this phobia, there's that trauma that until the time of today, you may not recognize. Why am I afraid of this? Why am I always having this kind of a panic when something like this happens? I mean, nothing in particular happened, but guess what? They'll tell you, oh, guess what? It probably traces back all the way to your ancestors, and you probably don't recall any of that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, well, some of that information that you don't recall is basically that information of that goes all the way even before you were even created, many, 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 many millions of years ago, when Adam was created. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took from the back of Adam and basically instilled and asked the question that they would bear witness upon themselves that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is their creator. So deep on the inside, you do recognize that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is your creator. You do recognize that. But of course, that information is not an information that you are capable of somehow just to bring it out. And you're like, okay, now I know this whole world was created by God. Okay, now I believe it. No, it doesn't happen like that, because what you on the inside will recognize is that you will just ask the question. So you recognize, let's call it this drive, but that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the prophets and the messengers to let you understand the information in regards to the drives on the inside. So the information is going to come with the prophets and messengers, but you basically have the hook on the inside that basically is seeking this information. So that's the first one. بعهد الله أوفوا. بعهد الله is not only in Tawheed, but is also in legislature. So that's why he said, عام في جميع ما عهده الله إلى عباده. Okay, that it would be comprehensive and basically inclusive in everything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had taken upon you to basically abide by, to basically consider it as a legislature that you would take as the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's basically what it is. Okay. So when we say that would mean it's inclusive to all that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had mentioned previously. Is this talking about mentioned previously in terms of these ayat right there? Or is this talking previously about, everything that was mentioned in Quran and Sunnah? So basically, it includes two. So you've got جميع جميع. So ذلك مع جميع من عقد بين إنسانين. Okay, so this would be anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically taken upon us basically from the early creation, or whether from our time as well. So we're talking about that ahd during the time of Prophet Adam alayhi salam, or we're talking about all the prophets and the messengers and what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically taken upon us in Shariat Muhammad ibn Abdullah. Okay, so this is extremely لعلكم تذكرون. I want you to look at the word لعلكم تذكرون, this one. لعلكم تذكرون. It's quite interesting that it said لعلكم تذكرون, because here al-Qurtubi said لعلكم تتعظون. What is تتعظون? تتعظون is that you would, have this reminder that basically would help you see how this will lead to a certain consequence. So you will see the examples, and based on the example, you would recognize that, oh, this is going to take me into the wrong area. So you're basically seeing a paradigm. You saw how somebody that had probably used drugs, and how their health deteriorated, and how perhaps they lost their money, they lost their college, they lost all of their family and all of these things. You see that as an example. That's a maw'idha. Just by looking at it, you're like, you know what, this is where this is taking me. And you see the people that probably went into drinking, same thing. You see the people that probably didn't achieve maybe college degrees, and how they struggled to find a job, how they struggled to live this up to this and that. And then that becomes, that good lesson. You don't have to live it to recognize where this is taking you, but you could see the patterns. Okay, so that could be one meaning, to see the patterns basically by the influences and the impact it will have. But here's one thing. Does this pattern have to be something that is always visible, that I could see during my time? The answer is no. Some of those patterns are not visible. I'll give you one example that really baffles me, and I don't know how to explain it, but I guess, get to the nearest to what I can probably help you see the patterns. And I'd love to hear how you can probably reword that in a better way. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَمَنْ قُتِلَ مَظْلُومًا فَقَدْ جَعَلْنَا لِوَلِيِّهِ سُلْطَانًا فَلَا يُسْرِفْ فِي الْقَتْلِ. Whoever was killed in an oppressive manner, it was some form of abuse, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give his guardians some form of empowerment. But then he said, فَلَا يُسْرِفْ فِي الْقَتْلِ. So there's going to be some empowerment, that this person that was a victim at one point, it doesn't have to be the deceased one, of course. He's dead now, okay? There's no question about that. but it said that there's still going to be some empowerment. So this is very important to let the people that probably went through abuse or trauma for them to know that there's going to be an empowerment. In other words, don't live victims to seeing yourself trapped in this trauma or trapped in this abuse that you lived in, or probably, a victim of something. Islam wants you to recognize that you are given a potential, not a capacity, because your capacity at that time probably didn't serve you well. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you, no, He'll give you a potential in the future. But He said, فَلَا يُسْرِفْ. I want you to look at the word فَلَا يُسْرِفْ, because israf actually means to take advantage of a certain potential or a certain capacity or a certain advantage that you could be given, and that's israf, and to use it in where it doesn't belong. Okay, so what does that mean? Why would Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say فَلَا يُسْرِفْ فِي الْقَتْلِ? And this is one thing, is that in studying a person, a psychology of a person that probably went through trauma or probably went through abuse or whatever it is, they may have the potential to retaliate. Or I don't want to say the potential to retaliate. I'll say they may have that feeling or the urge, and they are more susceptible than others to misuse this potential in order to probably make them feel good, to make them forget, or whatever it is. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, I don't want you to misuse, one, the trauma that you went through, or misuse the potential. And this is extremely important. A person that went through trauma may be more likely to make wrong decisions than a person that did not go through that. That's one. Number two is that a person that went through trauma, when they get the privilege to probably be in a position of leadership, in a position of probably retaliation, etc., they are very susceptible to letting their anger perhaps take over in what would make a fair punishment or a fair retaliation. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, فَلَا يُسْرِفْ فِي الْقَتْلِ. So we have to be really critical of our own selves and how sometimes we analyze our own, let's call it our own psychology, before we may get carried away with it. Okay, so when you look at لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ, why am I relating to this? When you look at لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ, yes, here Al-Qurtubi said لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّعِظُونَ, to see the patterns and where this is probably taking you, for you to say, hey, you drop out of school, this is what you're probably going to end up with. If you become a doctor, you're probably going to be having a very good opportunity, making probably a good job, social status, all these different things. You become, let's look at it as a mu'min. You become a mu'min, you have the opportunity to basically live a life of serenity, a life of happiness, a life away from khawf and huzn. This is key. Khawf and huzn. So is Islam promising that, yes, you'll be successful just for being a person committed to your salah, a person committed to your Quran, etc.? No, not in this dunya. But Islam tells you, I'll guarantee you one thing, لا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون. You would not fear, you would not be living in fear, and you would not be living in sorrow. But wait a minute, I mean, there are many people that are, look at the people of Gaza. Yes, they definitely did their homework with the salah, with the masajid, with Quran, etc. But look at them. You want to tell me they're not living in fear by their homes getting demolished? You want to tell me they're not living in huzn and in sorrow for losing their families? Right now, the mental health issues are right now going way up there and skyrocketing, really, way up there with all the people that lost their minds just because of losing their homes and family. And, some of them actually lost 30 and 40 and 50 family members. You want to tell me these people are not sad? You want to tell me these people are not living in fear? Absolutely, they're living in fear. But so why would you say, isn't that a contradictory? Let me explain it. So when we're speaking about fear, there are a number of different types of fears. There's the fear that basically makes you afraid to live the principle. That's the worst. That's that worst area. Remember the four different categories that we talked about? Al-adl, al-sabr, al-iffa, and al-shaja'a. Remember those four different categories we talked about? That's that fear. When you get up to that shaja'a, that courage, and then you give up on that fear and give up on your principle because you're afraid, that's the worst type of cowardice. That's the worst type of being a coward. Okay. Now, the other type of fear is natural fear. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talked to us about Prophet Musa alayhi salam and how fear tends to be a key thing in his life. His mother was afraid, puts him in this like a bassinet, throws him in that sea, and then his mother basically was afraid that he would get discovered, and his fear was always there. But when it came to practice and it came to test that fear, and then the people basically said, Inna lamudrakun. Why? Because Fir'aun was there basically saying, you know what? That they're just shirzimatun qalilun. They're just a small amount of people. But we got to make sure that these do not become the future threat to our government and the future threat to our kingdom. So we're going to go after them and kill them. And then, of course, when the Pharaoh and the soldiers, they get really near, even though, the sea was in front of them. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala orders Prophet Musa alayhi salam, hits with the cane, the sea opens up, they go through it. The Pharaoh says, well, you know what, it's open, who cares how it happened, but let's keep on going. So he goes and follows them, and that's when they say, Inna lamudrakun. What did Prophet Musa alayhi salam say? Kalla. Said, Kalla, inna ma'iya rabbi sayahdeen. Absolutely not, verily not. Inna ma'iya rabbi sayahdeen. My Lord is with me. That's that courage. That's that fear that you do not want it at all to get near that area, which is the fear of your commitment and your belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Inna ma'iya rabbi sayahdeen. My Lord Almighty is with me. He will guide me. So the fear in that area where you are willing to risk your principle, that's that fear that these people will not fear. Why? Because they went through the training. And when it says la khawfun alayhim in the dunya, that's that fear that they do not care about risking their wealth, social status, whatever it is, their dunya elements. They don't fear that anymore because inna ma'iya rabbi sayahdeen. My Lord Almighty is with me. That's the only thing that I care about. You can take my dunya. You can take my children. You can take my social status. You can take away my degree. You can take away all of that. But as long as inna ma'iya rabbi sayahdeen, that's all I care about. That's what keeps you strong. That's la khawfun alayhim. But a person that is afraid of social status, that's a coward. A person that's afraid of losing money, that's a coward. Losing life, that's a coward. And that's not an easy. You can give lectures on that. But guess what? It's not a lecture to give. It's so easy to give lectures on patience, to give lectures. Yesterday my brother called me and he said he's living in Palestine and in basically the Jerusalem area. And he bought his house. It's almost, I think he told me it was $360,000 almost. And he just got a notice to demolish his house. He called me yesterday and he said, I just got a notice that they're going to demolish my house. Just imagine. And, but I was really proud of how strongly he took it. And he said, you know what? I see the people of Gaza and how their demolished homes and they lost their family members, but they were really standing strong and they didn't care. And that's the same thing. I got that inspiration. He said, I got the inspiration, even if they tell me that, and I got this that Israel's going to come and demolish my house, but I got the inspiration from the people of Gaza, and yes, I'm really saddened that I got this notice, but at the same time, I'm really inspired by the people of Gaza. And subhanAllah, I mean, that was really strong. It's so easy to give all these lectures on strength and courage and in power and enduring pain and in being that if a person and being that person of recognizing just it's so easy. It's so easy to speak of that. And what really scares me is that the amount of I know it's a little off what we're talking about. When I see Muslim women running after puffing their lips and puffing their, the list goes on of what they're puffing and what they're huffing and whatever it is, and they're running after that fitna. And I'm just wondering, what if we got the Dajjal today? We question why the ahadith were telling us that women were going to be the first and the most of his followers. Look at that. We couldn't even see Muslim women stand in the fitna of a trend on what you appear, even though we know that studies are telling us these fillers, these Botox or whatever it is, and all these different injections are actually linked to cancer. But they're willing to risk their health as long as she gets, hey, the fit in feeling. You start wondering, like, what will happen to these women if it became a trend to follow the gel? If they couldn't even stand in front of a trend on appearance, are they going to be strong enough to stand in front of a trend on the gel? It's a training, it's a discipline. If you couldn't even discipline yourself on just accepting your appearance, just accepting your beauty, just accepting your health, accepting that. But you're basically, willing to take off your hijab, willing to put it halfway, willing to who knows what, willing to change all of that just because, yes, at least these guys would think that I look attractive. Seriously, you think that that's so worthy? You give up on your health, you're willing to risk your health, willing to risk your akhirah, willing to risk all of that for people to be content over you. Wow. What lack of confidence these people have. Allah musta'an. But yes, this is the situation that we're living in just recognizing to answer the question about khawf. If you're afraid of losing people being content over you, then you're living under their power. It's that simple. It doesn't have to be direct power. Because if you are willing to give up on your health for the sake of other people accepting you, then you really lack confidence. Then you really lack power. So when we say لا خوف عليهم, that would actually involve that these people, they will be so strong that no pain is going to shake them from living the principle. No threat. No offer that, yeah, if you do this, you'll get acceptance, you'll fit in, you'll probably get a better maybe opportunity for getting a job, etc., or getting maybe a social status or getting accepted, or none of that to them. That doesn't matter. Why? لا خوف عليهم. That's why they live the courage. That's why they live that principle. They live the courage. They're strong. Nothing will shake them. ولا هم يحزنون. Why ولا هم يحزنون? Because الحزن الحزن can be you're sad about your dunya, or can be that no, they know that they'll depend on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They know that no matter what goes wrong in my life, I depend on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Razzaq. I know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one to give victory. I know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one to give us that success. I know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one to give us all the things that will give us the meaning in this life, and basically the things that will give us the perseverance. So what do we live based on? We live based on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So لا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون in dunya. That's what it would look like. There's no sorrow. Radina, they'll tell you. Your home is demolished. You had 4 kids die. You had this. To Radina. We're good. Alhamdulillah, we're content that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's strong iman. That's a type of iman in Gaza we had seen that we thought was only legend in the stories of Sahaba. Was only legend, but you see it right now, right before your eyes. Now, subhanallah, and it's amazing. It's amazing. All right, لا خوف عليهم ولا هم يحزنون can also be on Judgment Day. لا خوف عليهم, on Judgment Day, they will not be the ones to fear the punishment, because they would basically know that they had lived to the principle of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All right. Then the second one, وَلَا هُمْ يَحْزَنُونَ, that they'll basically be the ones to be رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُمْ وَرَضُوا عَنْهُ. They'll be the ones that will be content, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will be content over them when they go to Jannah. Now, the other thing about لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ, is that related to what I had said earlier, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically said, وَإِذْ أَخَذَ رَبُّكَ مِنْ بَنِي آدَمَ مِنْ ظُهُورِهِمْ, etc. Is that related to this, that there's something on the inside? In other words, is it part of a psychology, or is it part of our nature that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had taken upon us to recognize some of these things? Okay, what am I saying? So is it part of your nature, your instinct? You were created deep on the inside to basically, one, not associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to be kind to your parents, to not kill, and recognize that killing is a bad thing, or perhaps that certain bad things that you reckon, is it part of your nature, or is this something that someone has to teach you that these things are wrong? Do we know it by our instinct? And this is a whole philosophical debate, by the way. A whole philosophical debate. Do we know what's right and what's wrong within our instinct? Or are we taught the parameters of what's right and what's wrong? All right. Now, the philosophers themselves, of course, there's a whole debate with, there's a whole debate whether this is a pattern that we recognize, and you've got the John Locke theory, and you've got the theory for the theory that considered that no, this is just in religion, and you've got the other theory that no, you live to maximize happiness, and which is the universal imperative, and you recognize that, hey, this is going to be, if everybody lives according to these sets of these sets of principles, that we're going to be having a happy world. We're going to be living in some justice because we recognize the golden rule, and we recognize if somebody were to do this to me, this is how sad I would be, and therefore this. Okay, but regardless of all these different theories in philosophy and what they would consider, of course, there's also the Aristotle and the Plato's their theory as well. But I'm not going to get into philosophy and all of that. But I'll just make the story short that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us an indication that some of the akhlaq were actually put just like when we're feeling that we recognize that shirk is, or associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or not believing in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just like it is part of our DNA. There are certain akhlaq that are part of our DNA. So it's a compass that you were created within, and you recognize that this is good or this is bad. Some akhlaq, not the details, but some akhlaq, whether this is a child or whether this is a grown-up, they recognize that this is a noble behavior, or this is an evil behavior. In other words, you have the instinct that basically is deep on inside. You would basically know that being good to your parents is basically good, that not killing is evil, and that let's say in abusing those that are vulnerable is evil, and that injustice in probably trade, or injustice in business transaction, all of that is evil. You recognize it on the inside. Okay, now, is that وَبِعَهْدِ اللَّهِ أَوْفُوا, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting us know that, you know what, it's deep on the inside of you, that you've got these key things, and therefore, once you're committed to that, that's what would revive, let's call it, kind of like lights on the inside of you. So what does that mean? If you shut down these lights and you engage in any of this, what does that mean? Well, that basically means you are killing sensors within yourself that was supposed to help you relate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by turning these switches on. So you are committed to, for example, in justice, in making trade, in not abusing people's rights, and being kind to your parents, and not associating partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in staying away from the different fawahish, etc. What that does is that, think of it as it's turning on these switches, and the more switches you have on, the more insight you basically can see, and that's the nur that would be in your heart. Think of it as switches. You can switch one light on and another one and another one. And the more switches, the more lights you have on, the more enlightenment you would basically feel on the inside. And that's why it said, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ. Okay, so لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ is related to, one, certain sensories that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put within you to recognize truth. That's number one. Number two is that لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ, it's letting you know by being committed to these, of course, let's say principles, that's what's going to keep that switch on. By being committed, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ, it builds awakening on the inside of your brain, on the inside of your body, on the inside of your ruh, on the inside of your heart, and that's what would give you that reminder. So when you say reminder, how can that be a reminder of something that I don't not recall? Remember, when you recall something, you don't only recall in your brain. There's one recall in your brain. There's another recall, which is basically in your DNA, in your instinct. Remember when I said you don't recall everything that basically would shape the color of your eyes, the makeover, the different diseases that probably happen, trauma, whatever it is, all of these things you probably know and have no clue of, but your genetics remembers it like it's today. There's no way that you can change it. like it's today, and it will keep track of each and every single thing. It's in your DNA, it's right there, and you cannot change it. It's right there. But you can be aware of it to either keep it or change it. Keep it or change it. Do we only get bad things? No, you also get good things. You also get good things. There are certain, hey, you come from a family of intelligent people. Guess what? You're very likely to get all that intelligence as well within your gene. Your parents are smart. Yes. Okay, your mom is smart too because you're more likely to get your mother's intelligence than your father's intelligence. Okay. So, okay, are they from a smart gene? Yes, they are. Okay, you're more likely to get that one as well. You're more likely to probably get a certain habit, or even, we're talking about maybe up to the level of perhaps maybe even the fat distribution in your body, and probably left hand, right hand, the color of your eyes, all of these different things. Yes, you're going to get it through your parents. So if that can be recalled, even though you know nothing about it, but having that brought to your attention helps you recognize the good and helps you recognize the bad to avoid. So keep that one in mind. So when you say لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ, that's in order to tell you that, listen, it is part of your makeover, it's part of your instinct, it's part of your nature that you recognize that these are manners that you have to commit to. Whether you're Jewish, Christian, etc., no matter what religion you come from, this is part of your makeover, it's part of your instinct. But some, they may lack commitment to it and they end up forgetting about it, or it ends up becoming, this turned off switch. You turn off a switch and another switch and another switch, and this person basically is completely unaware of all of this and will even be in denial that they have anything of that sort, and even make a new narrative to say, well, this is absolutely false. And they're, just like the atheists, they'll tell you there's no such thing as objective morality. Okay. And they'll tell you, no, there's no such thing. It's all about interest and it's all about pay. We're just trying to make our life easier, but there's no such thing as morality. And that's one of these implications of atheism, is that if you say there's no morality, then that situation, it's all about, hey, if I get away with it, that's all that's all there is to it. I just do what's wrong and I'll get away with it. But really, incest, there's no such thing. There's no cannibalism. When Richard Dawkins, he was asked about cannibalism, he just said he doesn't have the taste for it. Of course, because there's no objective morality. If you don't believe in God, if you don't believe that there is any makeover of morality and ethics, then of course you're not going to see anything wrong with cannibalism. You're not going to see anything wrong with eating this or that, or even killing, because to you, okay, what's the consequence? So that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was letting us know that religion is more than just believing in God, but it's also recognizing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put certain intuitions to help you find guidance. Keep that one in mind. And that's why it said, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ. It's an intuition that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put within you to help you find guidance, to turn on these switches, to basically be committed. And that's going to help you find that enlightenment in that light to guidance. It's that simple. The light to guidance. So that's why he said, لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ. And that's basically true with all the different principles that you might follow. The more and the stronger you hold on to the principle, the more committed, the stronger the perseverance, and certainly the stronger the perseverance, the higher you go up into the rank of iman. Possibly ihsan is, we're looking at the highest level. Iman is a little less, etc. But you have to have, it's an inner will that you have to train yourself into, and not wait for just the information. No, you have to put in how you control your inner will. Okay, لعلكم تذكرون. Let's go for number 14. And he said, وَأَنَّ هَذَا صِرَاطِي مُسْتَقِيمًا فَاتَّبِعُوهُ. Look at this. It doesn't say وَأَنَّ, and this is the path of guidance, or the path, the straight path, then follow it. He said هذه آية عظيمة عطفها على ما تقدم، فإنه لما نهى وأمر حذر هنا عن اتباع غير سبيله، فأمر فيها باتباع طريقه على ما نبينه بالأحاديث الصحيحة وأقاويل السلف. Quote, he said, this is a magnificent and a great verse, that it was added to the previously mentioned values, that is, before, for after he had prohibited and ordered for a certain, basically for certain things, he cautioned to follow other than the path of him, other than the path of his path. And he had ordered in it to follow the path of what would be shown in the authentic ahadith and the words of the predecessors. That's a very important thing to say. So what does that mean? So this portion, remember when we said that some of it is an intuition that you would feel, but there's another, وَأَنَّ هَذَا صِرَاطِي مُسْتَقِيمًا فَاتَّبِعُوهُ. So are we capable in just depending on this intuition to find a straight path? No, that's not enough. Why? Because you may have the intuition to do, you can have somebody that is not Muslim. And this person that's not Muslim may be a person that is so committed, probably active in maybe helping the people of Gaza, active in their honesty. They've got the strongest integrity. They'll be so honest and they will be so committed. They will be so they will be so good to their parents. They're just people of kindness. They're not killing anybody. They're just living basically all of that. There's no question. The only problem is they have shirk. She's probably a Christian nun or something. Okay. And yeah, we can see that. My grandmother was a Catholic nun for 17 years and never became Muslim, but she was really just this. She did stay Catholic, but she was the kindest person you could think of. And she would not engage in fawahish. To her, she would be like, this is not acceptable in Catholicism. I won't engage in it. And she would be just the person that would be so committed. And whenever she sees wrong, she'd be getting so angry and, and telling you that you shouldn't be doing it and whatever, all of these different things. And subhanAllah, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that that's not enough. In order to learn how to stay committed to it, وَأَنَّ هَذَا صِرَاطِي مُسْتَقِيمًا فَاتَّبِعُوهُ. This is the path that is the straight path, so you must follow it. In other words, what helps you maintain that light that keeps your intuition intact is basically this ayah. وَأَنَّ هَذَا صِرَاطِي مُسْتَقِيمًا. And this is the path, the straight path, that basically is to help you have that perseverance, maintain your Islam, and therefore, when we're talking about Islamic legislature in its details, that's basically to help you build that perseverance, that commitment. Basically, all the different details are there to help you lighten up and make sure that that stays always in a position of tadhakkarun, of a reminder, of commitment, of intuition. Those lights are standing high and lightening at their brightest, not dimming every once in a while. So how do I keep those lights on? Well, basically, وَأَنَّ هَذَا صِرَاطِي مُسْتَقِيمًا. You follow my path, therefore, فَاتَّبِعُوهُ, then take that one that knowledge, but just the knowledge about this Surat Mustaqim, about what the Prophet ﷺ had come with, that's not enough. So he said, فَاتَّبِعُوهُ. You have to put in, and I want you to look at this. The shadda right there, and the root is tabi'ah. Okay, but the shadda right there is to let us know that it's not enough to just know the information, but there has to be one, repetition. There's a gradual process in what level you're probably growing in your commitment. And number three, that you make this as a commitment. And that's called a tad'if. A tad'if is like you basically make that into something that you would stress in your life. Okay, so that's what that shadda means. You've got a gradual process to grow. You've got two, which is a repetitive behavior that you would discipline yourself into. And number three, that you would put in that commitment. فَاتَّبِعُوا. You would put in that commitment and you would stress it as part of your identity, and that's that word fattabi'u. You see this shadda, there's no way that I can explain this in English in just one shadda right there. Of course, in Arabic, that's all you could see in just this little tiny thing right up there, this thing that you see in that square right there, maybe I can show you. You see that right there? That's what that shadda means. That shadda means these three elements that I just told you. There's a gradual process. Two, there's a repetitive behavior that you have to basically stick to. And three, that you have to put in that commitment no matter what it takes. Okay, وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا السُّبُلَ فَتَفَرَّقَ بِكُمْ عَنْ سَبِيلِهِ. Let's look at that one. And do not follow, وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا, and do not follow the different paths. فَتَفَرَّقَ بِكُمْ عَنْ سَبِيلِهِ, and it would basically sway you away from the path of Allah Almighty. ذَلِكُمْ وَصَّاكُمْ بِهِ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. This is what the Lord Almighty had taken upon you. In other words, asked you to basically take seriously in your life. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. For that may, the word تَتَّقُونَ is like give you fortification, empower you. That's what we'll get. Think of it as an armor. We talked about that taqwa, and we said it's like an armor. When somebody wants to hit you, right away you put your hand in front of them in order to protect you from anything that might actually come across maybe your face, perhaps your abdomen and your groins. So you find yourself, I'll use my hand to basically protect me and protect those sensitive areas, which basically is your head and your face, your abdomen and your groins, because those can be fatal if they were attacked, because they're the ones that are basically those areas that are the most sensitive areas. So when you look at that taqwa, think of it as the armor that's going to keep you stronger. How do I maintain my strength? وَأَنَّ هَذَا صِرَاطِي مُسْتَقِيمًا. This is your key thing. This is your key tip to keep you strong. وَأَنَّ هَذَا صِرَاطِي مُسْتَقِيمًا. So when it said وَأَنَّ, so what that means, what? وَأَتْلُ أَنَّ هَذَا صِرَاطِي, and let them know that this is the path to the Lord Almighty. Let's say, and وَبِأَنَّ هَذَا صِرَاطِي, and that this is, so if we were to say that this is saying وَبِأَنَّ هَذَا صِرَاطِي, meaning that الصراط is actually what was mentioned. But then, let's say, وَلِأَنَّ هَذَا صِرَاطِي is another explanation that this is why my path is the straight path. Why? Because it relates to taking you into that commitment to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's see the other scholars. By the way, let me just explain to you what is going on right here so that you would understand. So he said, قال الفراء. He said الفراء, basically a scholar in Lugha Arabiya, okay, and a scholar basically in Qira'at as well. And he basically said, أي وصاكم. So this is all scrutinizing the grammatical explanations. Okay, every single grammatical explanation in Lugha Arabiya has a meaning. So if you were to suppose, okay, that this is أي وصاكم وبأن هذا صراطي, as this is in Lugha Arabiya, you can sometimes omit a certain letter, and the context is to give you a certain meaning, or the grammar is to give you a certain semantic, it's to give you a certain explanations, to give you a certain, it's all that area of the hermeneutics and the tafsir and all of that. So I'm not going to go into that, but I'm just letting you know what these scholars are right now discussing in terms of the grammar and the implication it has on the meaning, and how at the end of the day, whether this is talking about all the previously mentioned, or whether this is talking about the path that the Prophet ﷺ was sent to clarify to the people in the Quran and Sunnah, that all of this is basically included in here. And the other qira'at, is it وَأَنْ هَذَا صِرَاطِي مُسْتَقِيمًا, or is it وَأَنَّ هَذَا صِرَاطِي مُسْتَقِيمًا فَاتَّبِعُوهُ? Different qira'at, but he said, well, it doesn't really make a difference in the meaning, but it just basically is talking about that this is a form of an affirmation and confirming a certain meaning. Okay, so when you talk about as-sirat, what is as-sirat? As-sirat is basically the path. What path are we talking about? It's basically talking about the religion of Islam, and mustaqim is basically describing. So if you were to say, وَأَنَّ هَذَا صِرَاطِي فَاتَّبِعُوهُ, okay, is that a complete sentence? Yes, it is. That this is my path, so follow it. The complete sentence. But why say mustaqiman as like an adjective to describe all of this? Well, it's basically to describe it, to let you basically recognize what path we're talking about and recognize what it contains. What does it contain? So when you say mustaqim, what does it contain? Well, it contains things that are not crooked, things that are straight, things that it's a paradigm that is related to one another. Think of it as physics. This is related. Point A is related to point B. Point B, the reason why you were asked to lower your gaze when you probably see a woman that's not properly dressed, or a man that's not properly dressed, or probably handsome, or a beautiful girl, whatever it is, you lower your gaze. Why? Because that's related to enhancing your ability to stay strong and away from getting dragged into zina or getting dragged into sexual drive or whatever it is. So you basically learn how to be committed from in point A. If you are committed in lowering your gaze, then point B, which is being away from zina, is basically going to be strengthened in you. Because if you fall in point A, the chances are you might actually fall in point B, which is zina. Okay, so you live to that principle, and you learn how to control your whims, and you learn how to control yourself in order to be from point A, B, C, D, in order to stay strong till the very end. So he said, and this is to mean that the path is لا اعوجاج فيه. It's not crooked. So what do you mean it's not crooked? I mean, what does that even look like? So, in other words, it's not crooked, meaning that they're all related to one another. Everything in the deen is related to one another, and therefore it's to help you maintain this commitment all along, and that everything in the deen, you can't say, well, what does hijab have to do with being religious? Oh, it's, لا اعوجاج فيه. In Islam, everything's connected with one another. To think that this is irrelevant to faith, you're confusing what faith is. So Islam tells you, وَأَنَّ هَذَا صِرَاطِي مُسْتَقِيمًا فَاتَّبِعُوهُ. Faith is related to how you dress, how you eat, how you practice your social life, and how you practice your transactions. All of that is related to faith. But your myopic vision might tell you that it's not related to faith, because, of course, in our modern times, that faith is just a moment that you would probably maybe cross your legs, and just somehow, wait till sunrise and just feel that you're connecting with nature and think that this is faith. But Islam is telling you, well, no, 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 no. what you do and what you behave in, and what you behave in all corners, whether you're eating, you're drinking, with your husband, with your wife, with your children, with whatever, with the society around you, what business, all of that. It's related to how you turn on these lights of faith on the inside. So he said, فَأَمَرَ بِاتِّبَاعِ طَرِيقِهِ الَّذِي طَرَّقَهُ عَلَى لِسَانِ نَبِيِّهِ. So he ordered to follow the path that was basically designed, or at least not designed, let me correct that, that he had explained and basically had shown you the path to how you would basically find a straight path on the tongue, and basically the words and the teachings and the preachings of what the Prophet ﷺ had basically taught in legislature, in explaining where this is taking you, that it basically leads to Jannah. And even though, of course, there may be so many different paths out there, so whoever is committed to the straight path, those are the ones that would be saved. And whoever goes off the path of what was revealed unto Prophet Muhammad SAW in the legislature, then those are the people that would find themselves in hellfire because they went off the path. Let's see. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا السُّبُلَ. And this, of course, is a confirmation of what was said before. Let me just erase that one so we could see it, and it kind of helps us. Oh, here we go. I'm gonna just really right there and just help you see it. And here we go. We're gonna put in some highlighter again. So وَأَنَّ هَذَا صِرَاطِي مُسْتَقِيمًا, that's the first sentence right there. Okay. Then therefore, to confirm, just like in the Quran, you have a tazkiyah and you have a tahliyah. Okay. You have a takhliya and you have a tahliya. Not tazkiyah, but you have a takhliya and you have a tahliya. So you have la ilaha. This is what you need to abandon. And there's also a tahliya. There's that other piece that, well, this is what I want you to not abandon and to hold on to. Takhliya and tahliya. And this is very important. Before you speak about perhaps maybe bringing in furniture in your house, and probably, hanging some beautiful pictures and bringing flowers. No, you got to clean up the place first. You got to clean up. And that's the same thing with your heart. You got to clean up your heart first from all these different contaminations. And then, وَأَنَّ هَذَا صِرَاطِي مُسْتَقِيمًا. Then you recognize the straight path. You recognize it through one, ilm, and then فَاتَّبِعُوا, that you do through discipline. And then وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا السُّبُلَ, and therefore you would abandon. There's no way that you can create a certain identity of yourself unless you recognize that you are not part of the other identity. So he says, وَلَا تَتَّبِعُوا السُّبُلَ, do not follow the different paths, and then that may take you away from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you are Muslim, that means I'm not Christian. I am Muslim, therefore I'm not a feminist. Therefore I am Muslim, therefore I recognize that it's only one thing. And I cannot adopt some dual identity and think that, I can somehow mix and match, because at the end, he said, فَتَفَرَّقَ بِكُمْ عَنْ سَبِيلِهِ. Let's look at this one. Ad-Darimi, and he basically had narrated, and he said it was isnad sahih. It was an authentic chain of narration. What did he say? That Abdullah ibn Mas'ud had said, خط لنا رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يوما خطا، ثم قال هذا سبيل الله، ثم خط خطوطا عن يمينه وعن شماله، ثم قال هذه سبل على كل سبيل منها شيطان يدعو إليها، ثم قرأ هذه الآية. And then recited basically this ayah. So what does that mean? Abdullah ibn Mas'ud was with the Prophet ﷺ, along with a number of different Sahaba. And then he drew a graph, or at least drew some kind of a, well, I'm going to draw it for you in just a bit. And then these lines, he said, this is the path of Allah. And then he drew all these lines on the right and these lines on the left. And he said, all those paths are paths and upon every single path, there's a shaitan that would call to it. You know, the Prophet ﷺ, in two different narrations, he basically he basically had drawn, let's not call it a piece of art, because that was more of a visual thing for people to see. Those are the two things that the Prophet ﷺ had that the Prophet ﷺ had drawn. Let's see the first one. The first one, which is what we're doing in this hadith, that the Prophet ﷺ basically drew one straight line, and then he drew lines on the left and lines on the right, and he said, this is the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And upon every single line here, there's a shaitan that would create narratives and rhetoric to basically confuse the people, that as if it's a different path, when the truth of the matter is just a different rhetoric, or just a different way of describing something else. But the truth of the matter is that each and every single one of these has a shaitan to make it seem rational, to make it seem acceptable, to make it seem good. So this can be called Christianity, this can be called atheism, this is called feminism, this is probably called Catholicism, this one's called Hinduism, this one's called, who knows the list, Taoism, this one's called, universalism, the list goes on, and without us realizing, it's just a different name for the actual same thing, which is away from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay. The other part that the Prophet ﷺ had basically, we're going to get out of this one. Let's go for the other time, which is when the Prophet ﷺ drew a line. That was the other hadith. The Prophet ﷺ drew a line. Let's see here. Abdullah radiallahu anhu قال خط لنا خطا مربعا. The Prophet ﷺ basically drew a square, and then he basically drew a line في الوسط, right there. خارجا منه. So this line basically goes a little bit outside. وخط خططا صغارا. These lines right there, they're connected with this one that is in the middle. And here we go. And basically this line right there. And then he said, well, this is the human, and this is all that surrounds the human, is basically their fate. In other words, their death, the end of their time. And then you have all these different stations in their life that can be a calamity. And then the person is living in this hope that one day they'll make it. But the truth of the matter is that they're basically surrounded with their own ajal, with the end of their time. So they're trying to survive, making it through one calamity after the other, one hardship, going to school, maybe marriage, maybe kids, maybe this. But then they're thinking that, yeah, I'm going to get to this happiness, this dream of mine. And when in reality, this dream is really, hey, you're looking at that boundary of their own fate, their own death basically is right there. You can probably think and live in this mirage that one day I'll make it. But the truth of the matter is that you're just going to keep on running thinking that one day I'll make it. But what you really need to make it to is Jannah. Okay, so now that we see that the Prophet ﷺ was basically explaining to us what really is out there, of course, we do have a number of different hadith that explain this. This is what we're going to do next time we come to tafsir, because there's so many different things and so many different things to say. Next week it's just going to be studying this ayah, just this ayah basically. And you can see there's so many different hadith that we really need to talk about right there. So a couple of different hadith that we need to cover, and they're extremely important, because if we did not have these hadith, we would be probably giving a very metaphorical, very rhetorical explanation, but then definitely that would be too surface, too shallow, but we really need to see deep on the inside. What does it mean to follow the path? What does it mean to be committed to the path? What does it mean to hold on to the principles of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That's the key thing. So we're going to get to explaining those hadith and see what the Prophet himself had to tell us in regards to this path. So in the meantime, we'll stop right here, inshallah. All right. And we'll see you. Well, tomorrow we have the fiqh of marriage, so we've got some things to cover right there. And inshallah, the next time we do tafsir, this is going to be our homework, basically. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer it, inshallah. It wasn't too buttery today, right? It wasn't too bad. You prefer that I turn off the live stream? We could do that. That's okay.